Do you ever feel like the whole world has gone insane? Yeah, you're not alone. I feel that way. In fact, the majority of people feel that way. The truth is, we were all sold this great lie that being part of a silent majority was something we should be proud of. Being a silent majority allowed a very loud, angry group of people to control everything. And problem there is, that small group of people, they're communists. I say that myself as someone who's the son of a Cuban refugee who had to flee communism. I know the reality of how important the American dream is. I know how quickly we can lose freedom. And that's why this is our last stand. I'm your host, RobbyStarbuck, and I'm going to be diving deep on the issues and people that matter so that together we can save the American dream and once again become a loud majority that steers the direction of this country. If you're with me and you want to spread truth and wake up the masses, you're in the right place. Together, one piece of truth at a time, we can save America. Hey guys, today we've got a guest from, well, he used to work at the FBI. He's now suspended and has become a whistleblower against the FBI in terms of all the problems that we've seen coming up and principally what happened with the January 6th raids. And so I want to just jump right in. If you could introduce yourself, Steve, and let people know why were you suspended and why did you decide to become a whistleblower?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Steve Friend. I've been with the FBI since 2014. Joined after a few years as a police officer. My first assignment was to the Midwest in Northwest Iowa and Northeast Nebraska. Somebody with a law enforcement background, that's not an atypical career path for anybody joining the Bureau. There I investigated Indian reservation violent crimes for about 7 years. In that time, had about 200 cases open, 150 violent criminals arrested. But after my tour of service there, relocated to Florida during the summer of 2021, Daytona Beach, which was a resident agency of the Jacksonville field office, and took that transfer with the understanding that I was going to be working violent crimes against children, child pornography investigations, child exploitation, human trafficking. Took the transfer, worked it for several months, but then at the end of the fiscal year, at the end of September of 2021, was informed that I was going to be rolled over off of the child exploitation cases and moved into national security, the Joint Terrorism Task Force that is housed in Daytona Beach. And I was going to be focusing on domestic terrorism. That happened, and what I came to find out was that most of the domestic terrorism cases that were assigned to our office pertained to the January 6th cases that were stemming from Washington, D.C. My 8-year background, I was pretty familiar with a lot of the criminal investigative procedures and rules that the FBI sets out for itself. And when I started digging into the January 6 cases, saw that the FBI was not being consistent with those rules. So made the decision that I was going to come forward to my supervisor when we had some pending arrests and search warrants that were imminent and within a week. Brought my concerns to him and my theories and having worked through what the motivations for those inconsistencies were, said that I didn't want to participate in January 6th, said that it was in conflict with my oath of office and also just the protocols that we were using to bring people into custody I felt were somewhat abusive. And after I voiced that to my immediate supervisor, was walked up the chain of command to eventually the special agent in charge of Jacksonville, and ultimately, they made a determination to suspend my security clearance. So right now, I sit in limbo where I am technically an employee of the FBI. I am unpaid. My security clearance is in question at the moment.
And are you the only member of the FBI who stepped up and said something about feeling like there was a principal problem, a constitutional problem when it came to how they were treating January 6th and many of the people that have been held in solitary confinement, not given their right to a speedy trial?
I'm not. Having been in suspended status now for over 3 months, I've had some opportunities to connect with other individuals who are whistleblowers, who are suspended agents, and really the scales have fallen away from my eyes somewhat. And I've come to find out that people voice concerns about it through emails to supervisors, to direct comments to supervisors, and they were suspended or even terminated. So I'm not alone. I might be alone as having been somebody who's come forward to the media to address my concerns, but I am definitely not alone there in the suspended realm, and I'm also not alone with folks that I left behind. I talked to the rank and file agents, and then they've not shared my willingness to necessarily come forward, but they certainly share my opinions, my sentiments about the way that the FBI is pursuing the January 6th investigations.
Will you walk us through that process of, was there a factor leading to your decision to come out and, give a voice to this? And what has that whistleblower process been like? How have you been treated? Has it been something that you would still stand by, you regret, the pros and cons? Share with us that experience.
It's definitely been a bizarre world for me for the last 3 months. So the gist of my complaint about the January 6th investigations is it should be one case that the FBI works. Instead, they elected to open up a different case for every single subject. They'd made one case into 800 to 1,000 cases. Then they decided to spread those cases around to the field as opposed to working them from Washington, D.C. on paper. But in effect, what's actually happening is there's a task force in Washington, D.C. that's giving marching orders to the field. And basically, that's given the impression and given a statistical backing to this narrative that the country's seen that there's this rise in domestic terrorism threat around the country over the last couple of years, when really all the statistics that back that up are coming from the January 6th case. So that, to me, was really important. I wanted to get that out to as many people as I could, across the political spectrum, no matter what your news source of choice is for consumption. I think that is a major story that people should be familiar with, because the FBI's job at its root is law and order, and is diametrically opposed to that. What's going on is the FBI is contributing to raising the temperature of the room, and it's making everybody think that literally half the country are domestic terrorists, and that's a problem. We can't have a country if that's the case. So I've come out and I've tried to talk to the various media, because I think that's a really important bit of information that everybody should be entitled to, again, regardless of who you voted for in 2020 or any other election. The actual nature of my complaint process was after I was suspended, the next day filed my official whistleblower complaint with the Office of Special Counsel, with the Office of the Inspector General, and also provided that information to Senator Grassley, Senator Johnson on the Republican side for the Senate Judiciary Committee, and to Senator Durbin on the Democrat side. He's the chairperson, and also gave information to Jim Jordan, because he has openly talked about receiving lots of whistleblower information. I have since found out that both the special counsel and the inspector general are going to decline to pursue my complaint. They don't deem it worthy. So right now, I'm basically at the mercy of Congressman Jordan holding some hearings next year, and hopefully prioritizing whistleblower protection over other issues that seem to be shinier objects. And also reaching out to the media, because ultimately I've stuck my neck out. I've thrown my career away. I want it to be for something that's meaningful, and I genuinely do have a belief that my job is to uphold the Constitution and preserve law and order. And this is going to be the thing I have to do it, and that's the decision that I need to make.
Well, this was something I planned to talk about, but since you bring it up, I do think it's important just people know this is an aside, not a question or anything, just a fact for people from my own experience in politics. One of the most dangerous things about politics is show ponies, and we have a whole lot of show ponies in Congress and really in every facet of government who are more interested in getting sound bites, because that's what you get fundraising off of, is sound bites, than they are in actually making real change happen. And that's something that I would encourage everybody to look into your own rep, look into the people that you give money to. Look at what real lasting action are they creating through their actions. Are they just moving on every week to the new shiny object that can bring in donor dollars? Because if it's just, hey, I need this news clip so we can raise more money, that's not a good rep. Might be a good fundraiser, not a good rep. And I think that's one of the big changes in the future we've got to see in terms of voters in primaries. They've got to be very watchful of who's a show pony and who's a workhorse, because workhorses are going to prioritize things that might not be sexy on the outside. They might not be great for fundraising. They might not be the top issue of the day in terms of what the media is covering, but they're the issues that create lasting change. And I think that's something that people have to, be really nuanced and thoughtful about. But, moving on to sort of this entire subject, I think, goes to one thing for me. I believe that throughout our institutions, we're undergoing an ideological sifting, where the administration and power, the regime rather, they're sifting through every institution to get rid of people who I would consider our best ideological warriors, people who are not willing to go against their own integral values. They're not willing to go against the Constitution. They're people who are principled in every way. And I always ask this question to people. We just had an episode last week with a bunch of unvaccinated soldiers who have stood up to the mandate and are willing to lose everything for what they believe in. And I'm going to ask you the same thing I asked them. Do you believe that this is an ideological sifting that's occurring that is purposeful to shake out a certain ideology from our institutions in order to make it easier to consolidate power and really carry out the tyrannical things that they want to carry out, that we've seen them beginning to carry out? What can you say to that?
Without question, I agree with you. The things kind of became evident to me in October of 2021. It was when the vaccine mandate was rolled out across the federal government. And there was this option that was put before us that we could elect for to request a religious accommodation or a medical accommodation. And we had to attest to whether or not we were vaccinated against coronavirus. So I'm unvaccinated. I requested a religious accommodation, put in all the paperwork, put in the attestation, but I was uncomfortable doing it. And I even remarked to my wife at the time, I said, they're building a registry of people who are outwardly religious. And then when we applied for it, it was even asking you what your religion is. What are specific scriptures that you can cite? So they were there was a lot of scrutiny that went into this. And I even heard later on that there was comments made about, well, there seems to be a lot of people finding Jesus now that the vaccine's going to be required. And so I was very uncomfortable with where things stood because I felt like they were going to single out folks who held certain religious beliefs or beliefs about, bodily autonomy. And then, we flash forward to now, right prior to my suspension, I had sit-down meetings with people that were in pretty, elevated levels of management in the FBI and cited, look, I've been trained to identify potential abuses of power. It's incumbent on me to uphold the Constitution and to call us out if I believe that we're violating people's rights. And I said, my duty is to the Constitution and to my oath of office. And the response was, your duty is to the FBI. So, well, that's what's
interesting is all of these people who are out there saying things like that, like what you said, where they say, oh, there's a lot of people coming to Jesus now with these religious exemptions to get out of getting the COVID vaccine. Well, I think it's funny that a bunch of godless people who do everything possible to worship a hedonistic sense of reality over anything biblical or godly in any way are suddenly the arbiters of who is actually religious and who actually believes in Jesus and who actually has a religious objection. And shockingly, it's nobody apparently, because they've decided that even chaplains in the military cannot get a religious exemption. I mean, when you're at the point where you're telling pastors, no, your religious beliefs are not real, you've jumped the shark. And it's very clear. And the real problem is, the media is not communicating this to the public. And the other problem is when you look at the Democratic Party, over 50% were willing to take criminal action in polling against people who were unvaccinated. That is something that is core to the ideology of one party now. And it doesn't matter where you stand on every other issue. If you stand on this issue alone as saying, this is something that constitutionally we must protect is, number one, religious freedom, but secondary to that, the ability to decide what you inject in your body or don't inject in your body, then you cannot in good conscience stand with the Democratic Party of today. And that's sad, because I think that honestly, if we're being real with each other, even though I'm very opposed to the Democrats of today, I do think that it is healthy in a society to have multiple parties. I think it's healthy to have multiple viewpoints. I think it's healthy to debate everything. I don't expect everybody to be the same as me. I don't expect them all to think exactly what I think. But I am going to stand up against absolute extremism that seeks to strip rights from everyone. And that's exactly what they're doing through the way they've carried out all this COVID tyranny. What would you say at the FBI has been the success rate of religious exemptions? Do you know of people who've had them approved or not? Or is it kind of like the military where almost nobody's getting approved?
I don't know if any single one has actually been adjudicated. We put in the requests and they were never addressed. The only contact that I had back was I was assigned a particular advocate who was they made clear, well, we're not going to argue for you or against you. We're going to facilitate the discussion that's going to happen between FBI leadership and you and determine if this is going to be a reasonable accommodation that we can make for you. And then there was just no follow-up.
Well, that certainly goes along with the theory that this is an ideological sifting, because that's exactly what you would do. If you're not going to fire all of the people who put those in, you would create a list and you would compartmentalize the information from those intel agents so that they wouldn't be able to, get critical information or things that you wouldn't want them to get, because you'd want them on the outs of anything that they may try to blow the whistle on. So this goes to, further questions I had. I'm familiar with a lot of the training tactics in the intel community, one of which is psychological priming. The CIA, the FBI, many other agencies in the intel world, they teach their agents psychological priming. It's something we see happening at social media companies. So there's been a lot of big stories recently with the Twitter files in terms of the FBI's involvement at Twitter in getting things they want. And one of the things I noticed was they were psychologically priming employees at Twitter who were not intel agents and were not smart enough to pick up on what they were doing in order to get actions they wanted, which included the censoring of American citizens. So have you noticed those tactics being used through these agencies to prime not just social media companies, but large corporations to reach the goals of certain people in the intel community?
Nothing firsthand. I mean, I just have my own observations as a citizen. I think that if you're going to talk about ultimately like grooming of just the perception of competence at the FBI, that has been done, since time immemorial. I stood in the FBI and looked around on many occasions and said, I can't believe that there are certain people that are able to work here because they're just not functional human beings. And, I would make a phone call to somebody and identify myself as an FBI special agent, and they would, without question, turn over their personal information to me. The things that just stunned me. I said, just based on me saying I'm an FBI special agent. So certainly the FBI's reputation as being a stellar organization that is beyond reproach and of the utmost integrity is something that is, I at this point, I think is just a grooming feature because it's borne itself out to not be true. I also want to say that there is a information industrial complex has started to emerge here, similar to that military industrial complex, that scientific industrial complex that President Eisenhower spoke about in his farewell address. And I think that we can tack on now the information to that. And by that, I see that there's this gross marriage of the intelligence communities, the law enforcement communities, and the federal government, private sector, tech companies, and this surveillance capitalism that has now emerged as such a lucrative approach to industry. And they're all kind of working together in the symbiotic relationship. They're able to play accountability hot potato by saying, well, the government is somebody we respect because they have this great integrity, so they give us guidance. We have to follow it. It's not really our decision. And the government says, well, we're not telling them what to do. They're a private company. We're not interfering with them at all. We just issue guidance that anybody can take if they want. So they're able to all avoid accountability that way. And they're consistently shifting this Overton window in one political direction, which now is heavy left.
Well, I wanna just pop in. That's not your opinion. That is a fact. I'm reading from a paper here. When you look at each one of the social media companies, let's see here. Facebook has at least 115 highly ranking employees who are former CIA, FBI, NSA, or DHS employees. Twitter had at least dozens throughout recent years. This continues at other social media companies. These are not low-level CIA, FBI, NSA, DHS employees who then moved on to big tech. You understand why they did this. I understand why they did this. Can you communicate to the audience why we're seeing so many high-level intel agents go to work at social media companies?
Sure. And before we even get into that, the one that everybody's overlooked, which is the biggest, is AWS. Amazon Web Services hosts all of the information that the government has. So they're not even needing to communicate back and forth with the government in order to provide one to the other. So that's one that I'm hoping that there's going to be some sort of pulling back of the curtains on. But
unfortunately, I think our current Congress is just going to continue to give them money. If I'm being perfectly honest, even with the Republican majority, sadly, I don't think we have enough strong Republicans who are going to be willing to go fight that battle, because you are correct. Nobody talks about it, but Amazon and their cloud services and everything, they are one of the principal threats, I think, in terms of intelligence and national security, because they're pretty much getting everything at this point. I mean, they're hosting everything that you can imagine when it comes to the DoD, secret programs, things like that. And if you think about the information that they're able to get their hands on and, the people that they're able to potentially, not saying they're doing this, but potentially be able to blackmail with the information that they may have access to. That's dangerous stuff, really dangerous stuff. And it's flying under the radar entirely because, again, the sexy thing is social media because, Elon Musk bought Twitter and everybody's on it. And none of us realize that we're on Amazon's cloud services and their web services every day. So it kind of flies under the radar. So I'm glad you brought that up. But when you look at this, it goes again to an ideological sifting. And I think that it really is part of a larger plan the federal government has in current form, where the regime on the left would like to be able to segment citizens in as many ways as they possibly can, because that's how you create division points. And I think the more division there is, the better in terms of their view, because then you're able to keep people focused on something else instead of focused on, hey, what are all the ways my government is failing me? And I think you see this across the board. If you look at even your case, in your case, you were supposed to be stopping child sex trafficking, child sexual exploitation, CSAM on the internet, which commonly referred to as child porn. But instead, they pulled you off and had you go fight their political war to try to raid January 6th, people. And that was something you were unwilling to do. Thank God, because we need these people to stand up and say, this is wrong. The focus should be over here. I just saw Rep. Ted Lieu in the House, a Democrat from California, say that essentially you can't criticize the FBI because they do plenty and they are fighting child sex trafficking. They are fighting child porn or CSAM on the internet. What do you say to somebody like Ted Lieu? I said, hey, if you have 80 agents working on censoring Americans on Twitter, then you have 80 agents that you should have working these child sex abuse cases instead of going to try to censor American MAGA grandmas on Twitter. What do you think?
And just a reference on the amount of manpower 80 agents is, my first field office was the Omaha field office, responsible for all of Iowa, all of Nebraska. There were 75 agents that were responsible there. So that's the entire size of a FBI field office that was dedicated just to culling through Twitter feeds. Yeah, I saw Mr. Liu's comments about Matt Taibbi and the Twitter files. And Matt has been to my house. He's an honest journalist, regardless of where he falls on the political aisle. And he was essentially accusing him of lying about what the FBI did as far as reassigning agents from child exploitation to work domestic terrorism on January 6th. Firsthand knowledge happened to me. I was told that child pornography investigations were going to be considered a local matter, and that I needed to focus on domestic terrorism, which is i.e. January 6th. So that's just a politician running cover. I mean, I know he's a member of the Judiciary Committee, and he has, and certainly everything that's happened, in social media up till when Elon Musk purchased Twitter, and everything that's happened with the investigations that have gone against the people that went to the Capitol on January 6th have all borne out well for him and to support his narrative about this rise in domestic terrorism. So he's going to go to the mattresses on that, when probably the more prudent thing to do was just to keep his mouth shut and wait for the news cycle on Christmas to happen. So I don't think that was wise on his part. And I can tell you firsthand, it happened to me. And I can tell you that yesterday, I believe it was, the FBI issued a statement about the rise in child pornography cases that we're seeing nationwide. So it's just simply not true. That narrative is that he's saying is false.
Right. I mean, and it's alarming. The mainstream media, like The Atlantic, have said that child trafficking is a conspiracy theory. We have more reports than ever before in history of suspected child sexploitation, sexual exploitation, sextortion, sexual abuse reported to NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who, as far as I'm aware, are the only arbiter, collecting these crucial data points. And so I kind of want to backtrack before they, switched you to the January 6th step, before that became overtly the focus where they made these, changes. What was the FBI culture like in response to child exploitation issues? I mean, was there a acknowledgement that this is an epidemic in America? The demand is so great here, it almost surpasses drug trade. I mean, is there an awareness of it, or is there just a complete political bias and focus, laser focused on things like January 6th or, weaponizing, this prestigious institution in our country? I mean, I want to know, clearly, what is the difference here? Is it ignorance, or is this politically motivated?
I think child pornography investigations and also is basically considered like a step cousin to Indian reservation cases. And having worked both, I kind of got the feeling that when you're in it, you realize how crucial the work is and how the volume of this casework is. Outside of that, the FBI, it throws resources at it, but it's sort of like keeps them at arm's length, because I think the people that don't work it, and in the public at large, it's easier to pretend it doesn't exist. The FBI is great at getting headlines, and they want to always have that big case that they can get the PR hit for. Curiously, you never really see it for child pornography investigations, and there's certainly a ton of them out there. And there's ones that you would think would pique the public's interest if they bring down some super huge pedophile ring or a big website, something like that. But you never really see them. And I think that they've made the calculated decision that the public doesn't even want to know about these things. It's just easier to look away, look in another direction, and applaud and pat the back of the FBI for bringing down a drug dealer or a big public corruption case. But having been in there and doing the work, and you see the volume of it, and you could take the entire FBI and double the size of the FBI and devote everybody just to child pornography cases, and it wouldn't be fully assigned. It's just that voluminous. So, it definitely became a passion project for me once I relocated to Florida. Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to work it, great length. I was able to continue doing it off the books when I was reassigned to domestic terrorism, because some people did actually see the value of it and say that it was worth pursuing. But the individuals that do work it are super passionate about it. It's just that the people that are in positions to make the decisions about allocating resources would prefer to put those elsewhere. And I saw that firsthand in my field offices in Jacksonville. There was a full squad of agents that were working child pornography investigations. It was broken down, and they kept 2 individuals that were continuing to do it, and everybody else was moved to violent crime. And I was moved over to domestic terrorism.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's no greater evidence of that. I mean, and I'm not negating all the hard work that, the good ones that are fighting these issues, and how the scope of it and how hard it is that they're not doing their job. But the resources from the top that aren't allocated to, adequately address this crime, we're not seeing any reduction. We're not seeing any, fruits of these efforts. It's only getting increasingly and exponentially worse. And I saw, I think, a collaboration between NCMEC and FBI today, where they put a little, blue square out, essentially saying, recognizing this is a problem, and children are being, recruited online, and there's, sextortion cases that are through the roof, especially as kids are home for the holidays, spending more time online. But, it's interesting to me, particularly in Indian reservation cases like that. And I wanted to ask you about this. From my experience advocating for certain families, when they're in a Indian reservation, there is almost like a firewall that is impenetrable as far as our United States, laws kicking in. Is that one reason why FBI would be in charge of those reservations? I mean, what are some of the limitations? Say you have a child sexual abuse case or a child exploitation case on an Indian reservation. I mean, what are the limits for local law enforcement outside the reservation? Is it all internal? Why is the FBI involved? Could you explain that process?
Yes, it's definitely it's an interesting process. It's considered a special jurisdiction. So the Native American reservations are, for lack of a better term, they're an independent country within our country. But because through retrocession they've come back under the fold, there's just certain features that they can be independent of, and some that they can't. So you have a tribal council, which is essentially like a town government, city council. You have a tribal police department. You have a tribal court system. They have their own set of laws. But they're limited because they can only arrest Native Americans, and they can only charge things sort of at a misdemeanor level, regardless of what the crime is. So I've seen people and check their tribal criminal history, and those records are not even shared with the national database. So I had to independently verify, what was going on in paper versus what I could just, call my radio room and have them run somebody's criminal history for me. That was not included. And it would say, so-and-so was convicted of rape and got 40 days in jail and a $100 fine. So they're limited on who they can arrest. And then the Indian reservation actually operates within a county. So you would think maybe the sheriff of that county would want to get involved. But the county prosecutors are really loath to participate if it's going on the reservation. Even though it's within the county, they kind of steer clear of that. So the FBI has to get involved with things that are serious crimes where there's a Native American victim, and also has to get involved in, regardless of the severity of the crime, is if the perpetrator is not a Native American. Because if somebody's a Caucasian male could walk out and commit an armed robbery or a violent felony, and the tribal police could not arrest him, could maybe detain him temporarily until the FBI can respond. So I had cases that were just misdemeanor assault cases, but because the individual was not a Native American, the tribe could not pursue charges against him. So it's just really interesting, and there's all these matrices that, decision trees that are drawn out for you before you can even determine if you can take a case or not, or who would be the best route to do it. The other thing that I want to go back on what you're talking about with the severity with the FBI takes with child pornography investigations, it's one of the few violations that individuals can kind of beg out of because they don't want to be involved in, and there's no judgment, and you can be moved off of that. And when I moved to Florida and said, hey, look, I'll take those cases. I think they're righteous cases. There was like this relief, because like we have a guy who'll take it. So nobody else in my office had to take anything pertaining to child pornography. They could just give me any cases that they were carrying on their books that they were sort of looking out of the side of their eye at. And I said I would take it. But I do think it's interesting that, I could say, hey, look, not for me. The whole thing grosses me out. I'm uncomfortable with it. I've got kids. I can't do it. And efforts will be made to accommodate that. But I said, hey, I'm really uncomfortable with we might be infringing on people's constitutional rights, and we're not following our own rules, and we might be abusing people with January 6th investigations. And I was walked out the door.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I do want to ask you one more question just about Indian reservations, because I think it's an undercovered topic. And my experience has shown me that kids who are living on reservations, indigenous communities, are at exponential risk of sexual exploitation. Is that, in your opinion, a result of the fact that is an increased vulnerability, that perpetrators know that those crimes are less likely to be, have any accountability or, consequences for them? Or is there a culture that, kind of hides what happens on that reservation, for optics? What insight do you have as to why these numbers are so high and go underreported, and there's less spaces of indigenous children who've been victimized that we even know about?
Well, I investigated 3 different Native American tribes, so I can't speak to the entire Native American population in the country. But in my experience, children are at a significant risk, a heightened risk, I would say, and that is downstream from a couple of things. One, we have laws in this country that prevent the state government, from removing a Native American child from a Native American reservation and placing them in a different house. On occasion, it would happen, and then an effort would be made to bring that child back to the Native American reservation. And the argument is, we want to preserve this culture. But invariably, you return kids to poverty, when you return them to abusive households, and the reservations are just awash in alcohol abuse, drug abuse, gambling addiction, sexual abuse, and it's a grab trap. They cannot escape from it. And even if an effort is in good faith made, and I interacted with families that were, in a town that was 30 miles away that had taken in a foster child who was a Native American and had provided them love and care for an extended period of time, and they had formed this bond, and the state was going to remove that child and put them back with a family that had a dozen children living with a grandmother who was on benefits and didn't have an income, because we had to preserve the Native American culture. We had to obey this law. So that's a huge problem, because the kids can't be removed. Secondly, I think that there's also this tendency to defend the offender. I saw it repeatedly, where there would be a child would come forward, 14, 15-year-old girl, or even down to 8, 9, 10, and they would say, uncle sexually abused me. And there would be right away, it happened to me too, so it's just the way it is. Would be one defense. Another would just be, stand by your man, and that kid is lying. And that does happen. I mean, kids do make allegations, but an 8-year-old being able to connive that, they contrive that entire story, to me just was ridiculous, especially in the volume of times that I saw it happen. So there's always this trend to defend the potential offender, And ultimately, the defense that I saw a lot of times from offenders who even admitted to what they did, they said was, well, I was drunk, so, I can't be held accountable. And they looked at me in the eye and they thought that that was an acceptable thing, that I would walk away and say, oh, okay, no harm, no foul. You blew
I didn't realize you were drinking. No problem.
Right.
all the time, regularly. It was a frequent question of, on a scale of 1 to 10, how drunk were you? And, you'd get 7. Well, how many beers does it take you to get to 7? And they would say something like, oh, it takes me like 12 or 14 beers.
Right. And the other aspect is like they lack the infrastructure. They're not doing forensic rape kits or anything like that. I mean, it's almost like a socialized country with healthcare there. With they don't have the same things that we would have access to in other parts of America, which also increases of those vulnerabilities and maintains that culture of like the status quo of just, oh well, shake it off. Yeah, it's going to be fine. Kind of thing, and blaming the victim.
You could tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think this has a big part to play in a lot of the other societal problems for kids on these reservations. When you look at education outcomes and things like that, there's just such a large amount of trauma happening in these environments where there seems to be a lack of accountability for abusers. And I think when you have that amount of trauma, it's obviously not a place that's conducive to learning or safety in any way. And I think that's why you see the numbers you see in terms of very few people being able to graduate with good grades and being able to sort of be proficient at the next step. And it's not because there's something inherently wrong with Native Americans or anything like that. In fact, you look at the education outcomes previous, they were better than they are now. And so something changed in the culture, and I think a lot of that is a lack of accountability when it comes to abuse and trauma. And I don't think there's been anything to disprove that point. Am I wrong?
Right. Yeah, and having access to care is crucial. But those cultural norms also prohibit that being a priority in a lot of those reservations. So,
well, you reminded me of something. Mm-hmm. So this is a question more for you, Steve, but being a great admirer of my wife's work, I've come to understand the amount of child sexual abuse and CSAM that is being procured or perpetrated by people who work at places like the FBI is stunning. It's jarring. It's far more than people expect, and there's very little accountability. Why do you think that is? I don't know how much you know about this, but when Ted Lieu said what he said about the FBI, essentially making it sound like we're not allowed to criticize the FBI, my response included a bunch of news stories of FBI agents who themselves perpetrated child sex crimes, and they lacked accountability in many of those cases. Why do you think that's happening? And also, is our justice system, in your opinion, too soft on child predators?
I'll answer the second part first. Yes, way too soft. I live in Florida, and they're basically medieval when it comes to hands-on offenses. I don't see any reason why that can't be applied nationwide. I want to see the person raise their hand, with the exception of Ketanji Jackson, about why individuals who are consuming child pornography, it doesn't present a threat to the country. I don't care if you make an argument that, well, I would never do that to a child. That was done to a child, and you were a beneficiary of it in your own sick way. I don't know why we have a place for you in society. I think you should be buried in a hole, and we should bury the hole if we don't actually make it a capital offense.
I agree. I was saying, and I've said this a lot, actually, I don't understand why a politician has not run on a platform of death penalty for pedophiles. And because I think this is a universal thing. This is just my anecdotal experience. I think there's very few people who would go, no, actually, I would like to continue to pay taxes in the sums of millions and millions of dollars to keep pedophiles alive. And here's the thing. Yes, there needs to be a burden of evidence, because you can't go around just killing everybody who's accused of it, because it will be weaponized then. But you meet that burden of proof, I think that it should be an immediate execution, honestly, in a justice system that, gives you that speedy trial in front of your peers. If you're proven guilty, that's what I think the consequence should be, because I'm also of the belief, you look at all of the psychological work that's been done, this is a pro-science belief. This is an irredeemable group of people who are not going to change. It is not changeable. They may suppress it for a year or two at a time, but they will perpetrate again. You look at the recidivism rates, they're awful. These people are predators, and there's something wrong that we can't fix. So I think that the justice really needs to be on the side of the victims, and that means the death penalty for these cases. That's just something that for me,
People like to moralize until you ask them, what would you want if you're a child? And then, the answer changes.
And I can tell you, I when I first got brought over to work that violation, I sat down with a really experienced agent. He'd been doing it for a decade, and that's really, really rare. Most people get burned out pretty quick. And I just asked him, I said, what is the percentage of these guys that when you sit down with them, they confess? And he was like, every one of them. Said, I think in my entire career, 2 of them haven't. And one of them, even he gave me enough in there that I had tantamount to a confession. And I said, why? He's like, well, because it's ones and zeros. It's all there. It's undeniable. So if you're, for all the pushback on, these projects to free people who are on death row because they've been wrongfully convicted, I think that, that's a violation that would stand up to any sort of scrutiny just by the fact that the evidence is irrefutable and the violation itself is so gross that, again, raise your hand if you want to be the person that says, no, we need to be, Grace needs to triumph over justice here. I guess unless you're Supreme Court Justice.
A bunch of Democrat hands just went up for America.
I would say this. I do think it would be the greatest blow to the numbers skyrocketing in terms of abuse, because so many of these people who think about going to view child sexual abuse material, knowing that the death penalty follows, may never go and do it for the first time. Because as learned from her work, it's that first time that people, regular porn isn't good enough anymore, isn't doing the job, and they go search out something worse. They end up on something like that, and they go further down that path, and it does something pathological and changes them in ways that are very dangerous, obviously. I think you may actually, cut off a lot of those people from the very beginning, knowing, ooh, if I go down that route, potential death penalty. And I think that that's something that if you made that the reality, it would greatly reduce the number of people who are going and searching this stuff out. Because you look at the numbers, I think people just are not aware of the number of people who are actually seeking this stuff out. It's in the tens of millions. And that's incredibly dangerous. And that's at a bare minimum. It actually could be more than that. You look worldwide, but it's at least at the tens of millions that are verifiable who are looking at this stuff.
Right. And thus the demand is coming from America. And I wanted to ask you, Steve, one of the things that I see a lot in my work is working with social media companies when there is, CSAM on their platforms. In some cases, they're profiting off of it. They're taking out ads on it. The victims can't get the CSAM down. That this is child sexual abuse material, horrific rape, things to that effect. Even Pornhub. Yet Pornhub has a Twitter account still to this day. So where's the accountability with Section 230, basically providing blanket immunity to all of big tech for their violations, their complicity, their enabling of this problem of child sexual exploitation. So what was your interaction like, if at all, if you dealt with these social media platforms, having to work with them to address some of the child sexual exploitation content that you came across?
They did a pretty good job, at least in providing information to NCMEC and these cyber tips that we would receive. But who knows really defining good job? I mean, we were definitely inundated with them as they came through, but that might have only been a fraction of what was actually going on these sites, which is probably closer to reality than we would like to believe. But once that tip came in and we opened a case and we deemed it to be worthy of investigating, just having to go back and forth with them and get the information, they just seemed, and I understand they want to protect privacy, but they always shoot out these user agreements to people that are thousands of pages long and everybody agrees to them. You're telling me you can't put a clause in there that says, if there's a legitimate law enforcement investigation considering CSAM, that you forfeit your right to the Fourth Amendment and we can't hand over everything. I'm a civil liberties guy, but do think that there's some wiggle room there. So we would go back and forth, we would craft our search warrants and then our subpoenas with them, but invariably, they would find ways to kick them back. and it was very frustrating. It was very time consuming. The actual nuts and bolts of a CSAM investigation, they're not complex. It's an ocean of cases, and that ocean is like an inch deep. It's a very turn and a wrench. It's a few steps, and from initiation to conclusion. The entire process, if you had it at your fingertips, you could knock out an entire investigation short of interviewing the subject within a day. But because we have to send the processes off and we have to work to review what comes back, I mean, you're talking months and months and months in order to bring down one offender. And like you said, this is millions of people there, and it's only growing, especially when we lock kids home and give them nothing but a tablet or an iPhone for a year and a half. And sometimes it's not even stopped in some of these cities. We're seeing these sextortation cases that are getting blown out of the water. And we were told basically we can't do anything about them. It's no different than the Nigerian prince scheme that was all the rage in the 90s. Well, these kids are being extorted, but it's overseas, and we just gonna have to let that one go and tell them, oh, be careful with the internet. Let this be a life lesson to you.
Right. And I just love all the millions of dollars being spent educating the American public on the real dangers of these things. At the same time, while big tech is allowed to invite kids on the platform where most of the sexual exploitation is occurring. And like you just mentioned, if it's taking 10 days, the crime's happening in real time, you're not going to catch those perpetrators. That process is so long. But with AI ability, we could, streamline this process, but it requires big tech to be willing, to work with people who specialize in this, like ICAC detectives, like special agents like yourself. So, thanks for going down in the weeds with me on that. I really wanted, people watching to understand the nuances of this, of how hard it is to locate a child, to prosecute a crime, to get discovery, to get big tech to work with you. I mean, it's amazing, honestly, that you could even get to a prosecution with cases like this because of how many hoops, you have to jump through. And you look at a city like Nashville, we have only 2 ICAC detectives for all of Nashville. And how many crimes are occurring, with children every single day? It's a joke, so thank you for, bringing that to light.
I mean, it's the same federal level. I mean, getting a prosecutor to actually bring forward a case, they almost say, we don't want to take it because then we set a precedent that we're going to take those cases. And we just know there's so many out there. We want to do other stuff.
Actually, I have 2 questions. I lied. First question is this. Why do you believe, and corruption's the easy answer, it's the obvious answer, but I think it's deeper than that. But why do you think the FBI has not used the same channels they use in so many other cases to leak stories, to expose the truth about Jeffrey Epstein and the powerful men and possibly women involved in this operation? I mean, this was an operation to exploit young women, young girls, and to sexually abuse them. So why has the government essentially helped these people cover up their crimes? Because that's what's occurred. They've helped a group of very powerful people cover up their crimes, including the rape of young girls and women. Why? What is at the root of this? How poisoned is this tree?
Well, I mean, Ghislaine Maxwell got convicted of trafficking kids, but we don't know who, and that's just fine. We're going to all live with that answer. Just like, we don't know what happened in Las Vegas shooting. We'll just move on to the next thing. I think that somewhere along the line, that list is somewhere, and the right people who have access to that list don't want to get out. There's just too many people that are important movers and shakers in the world, and there's a fear that it would just create too much chaos to this new world order that we're building towards. So obviously, it's become prevalent with this. We keep saying stuff in the World Economic Forum and efforts in China with the social credit system. I think that's the goal of our ruling bourgeois elite, and they think that this will be just too much of a disruption to it because at its very core, everybody, we might disagree on tax rates and energy policy and war. Nobody's in favor of abusing children, and if the people that are the movers and shakers that are making decisions on tax policy and energy policy and war get called out for abusing kids, then that whole agenda is going to fall by the wayside. And the agenda is everything. It's almost religious. The secularist religion is the agenda that they're pushing.
I would say I do disagree. I will push back that nobody agrees with abusing children because It's now over 50% of Democrats agree with allowing children at these drag shows that are billed as all ages, family drag shows. It's blatant child abuse. If you saw the videos that were just put out by Taylor Hansen and Sarah Gonzalez in Texas, I mean, these are indisputably some of the most disgusting child sexual abuse grooming material that you will see that is allowed on the internet, and it's just barely allowed. And that's what's interesting. Actually, I got a sensitive content warning slapped on my Twitter account over sharing.
Taylor got
suspended, and yet the Democrats are totally cool with marketing this to children and bringing them to the shows to see simulated sex and nudity, but it's too sensitive for adults on Twitter to see. I think that says everything. But my last question, then you can ask, you might have 100 more questions.
No, I want to be respectful of Steve's time because this is such a great conversation, but we've gone over time.
I have just one, and that would be, when you look at the FBI and everything you've experienced, are things so rotten, so poisoned that in its current iteration, there's no redemption for the FBI? Do you believe, like I do, that the FBI needs to be essentially torn to the ground by the next administration, rebuilt in a new image, entirely separate from DC? I think we need to move the entire agency out of DC in terms of HQ, because I think that incestuous nature of DC is part of what has corrupted the FBI, and also that 10 years is too long of a term for an FBI director, that it leads to some of the corruption and ideological subversion we've seen come out of the FBI. What do you think?
You've echoed the sentiments that I've been expressing for the last several months. Yes, move the headquarters. There's already infrastructure at Red Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. There's a $2.5 billion facility that's been, they said it was going to be for training, but you can't move headquarters there. Huntsville is a great, wonderful place. If you object to moving to Alabama from Washington, D.C., then I have questions about, did you want to be a leader in the FBI, or do you want to just live in D.C.? The FBI is supposed to be nonpartisan. You should be out of the swamp. I think that you have to reverse engineer your thinking in order to make a decision about where you're going to invest your money. So if I came to you and said, look, I have $50 in a stock, should I buy or should I sell it? The best thing to do would say, well, if you had $50 cash, would you buy this stock, or would you do something else with it? And that's where you would decide, whether or not you're going to keep this stock or not. Same thing needs to be done to the FBI. It takes $10 billion to fund the FBI in a given year. If you had $10 billion on the table and I presented an agency as it's currently constituted, where you have a director who just walks out of mandated senatorial hearings, you have the Larry Nassar case happen, and fall off from that, you have the Gretchen Whitmer entrapment case that's emerged, you have what's going on with January 6th, with what's going on with the folks that are being arrested for praying outside of abortion clinics. Put all that on the table, good and bad. Would you give $10 billion to this agency? No, there's not a chance in the world. So there needs to be massive reform would be the minimum, short of dissolution and reconstituting the FBI in ways. And I have my own ideas about, what would be good ways to reform and reform the FBI as it presently exists, or to rebuild it from something from scratch. I think is completely doable. I think the next FBI director, if there's a new president in 2024, I imagine there's going to be a new FBI director in short order. That needs to be accepted. If you said, hey, Steve, you want to be the FBI director? I say, yes. 2 conditions. I have to work it remotely from Florida because I don't want to leave. And 2, it's got to be a 12-month assignment because that gives me the window that I need to completely dismantle the organization.
Awesome. Do you have any other questions?
No, just want to thank you on behalf of, the American people. We are dealing with so many spineless people that are in positions of power that refuse to come forward and do the right thing, by our Constitution, by God, by the fellow Americans. And it's not easy to do the right thing. It requires risk and sacrifices. And I want to thank you for being willing to do that, for being, willing to give a voice to the truth, to these issues, and continue to fight for our great republic. So thank you.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. You keep fighting. And where can people follow you?
Thank you. Yeah, I took the leap, got on social media. I'm on Twitter at @RealSteveFriend, and I'm on Truth at @real_SteveFriend.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks,
today.
Steve.
Thank you.
Hey guys, just want to thank our sponsor, Patriot Mobile, a fantastic Patriot-owned company that is challenging these big companies out there like AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, who themselves are taking your money and then giving it to organizations and endeavors that you don't agree with. So why not make the change today? Change to a company that is in alignment with your values, that will fight for school boards to be flipped. Yes, Patriot Mobile did that. They will fight for the truth to get out there to people. That's what they're doing today by supporting this show. So if you want to be one of those people that is an actual change maker, that lives out their values, make the change today. If you're worried about service, do not worry. This company is working off of these same service standards that the major companies are. The trick is those companies, they want to make you believe that they're the only ones you can trust, but the truth is you can't trust them with your money. So make the change today. PatriotMobile.com, promo code Starbuck. Thank you again to Patriot Mobile for supporting us in our fight to share the truth with the world. Thanks for joining me on today's episode. If you liked what you heard, tag me on social media, repost clips from it, share it with your friends. You sharing our show is how we grow, and it's how we get the truth out there. So if you want to help spread the truth and help wake people up, please go and share our show. Go to our website, RobbyStarbuck.com, for more information or to watch old episodes. See you at the next episode.